Look at what's happened to the apostles in the last 3 weeks. I mean, at a certain point, we want to say, who are these guys? Where do these guys come from? Because 3 weeks ago, you remember they were all locked in the upper room for fear of the Jews. They didn't want to go out in public. They didn't want to be persecuted. They had kind of secluded and isolated themselves in this little room. And now, I mean, we can't stop these guys. They're all over the place. And we see this again and again in the Acts of the Apostles. We hear it in our first reading this morning. They're out proclaiming the good news of what's happened to them. They're out spreading the name of Jesus, and they get arrested, they're questioned, they're put in prison, then they're released. I mean, this is the same cycle that happens over and over again in the Acts of the Apostles. They preach the word, they get arrested, they get beaten, they get released, they preach the gospel, it's the same thing over and over again. But what's interesting is the transition, the change that has happened in the apostles. They say to the Jewish leaders in our first reading today, we must obey God rather than men. We have to preach this word. We cannot keep it in. We have to tell people what has happened to us. This is the transition that has happened to the apostles in this short amount of time. The question is, what's happened to us? What's changed in us? You know, the church in this season of Easter really keeps putting before us these resurrection narratives, as if to say, look, the Lord is risen, look again. Even if you thought you saw it before, look again. And the church keeps kind of pushing us to look at our own lives. If you think you've seen Him once, then keep looking. Look again. This is the challenge for us, I think, because sometimes it's easy for us to get stuck on the surface. You know, as we look back on the celebrations, is it just for us that we remembered a man having supper with his apostles in the upper room? Is it just that we saw a man crucified and put to death on a cross? Is it just that we saw this image of the empty tomb? Is this it for us? Is it just a memory of something that happened a long time ago? Because if that's it, then the chances of us having changed are probably pretty slim. You know, with the whole season of Lent and the whole season, this season of Easter that we've celebrated so far, if we haven't seen this in our own lives, if it hasn't changed us, then we're probably right where we were when we started Lent, which is a shame because it was a lot of suffering and sacrifice during the season of Lent. We're called to change. The church says to us over and over again, look at the risen Lord, look at what He's doing, look at how these people are being changed for our sake, so that we can look again at our lives and ask ourselves if we've been moving. In some ways, Jesus is saying to us what He said to His apostles, throw your net again, cast your net once more into the deep. We can almost hear the sarcastic response of the apostles. Oh yeah, sure, the right side of the boat. Why didn't we think of that all night as we've been fishing? And it's easy for us, I think, to do the same thing. You know, Lord, I go to work every day and I look and there's nothing there. I go to school every day and I try to find something among my classmates that's useful to me, but there's nothing. I can't find anything. It's easy for us to get caught up in this and to believe that there's nothing new that God can do for us in these routine, kind of mundane situations and circumstances. And so the challenge is to cast our nets once again into the deep. And this is really the call of faith, to keep going deeper. And we see it here, I mean, even in this space. We are reminded as we have this Easter candle, which is a reminder of the presence of Christ. It's also a reminder of that pillar of fire that led the Israelites from slavery in Egypt through the Red Sea into the freedom of the Promised Land. We have all these statues surrounding us in this church, not for us to worship, but to remind us that as we gather here, that we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. We are joined by all the saints and angels as we celebrate this Eucharist and give worship to God. I mean, even the structure of this building is a reminder to us of the Jewish temple, the gathering space, the space dedicated to worship, the sanctuary, the Holy of Holies where the presence of God is kept. There's so much depth here. Even in our worship and the words that we use, the prayers that we say, there is so much depth and so much beauty for us to plumb the depths and to see what it is that God is offering to us. And if we can't see it here, if we can't come here and see that there is something more going on, then how in the world are we going to go back into work and our circumstances and see something more there? Because I would suggest, I would guess that there are probably not a whole lot of coworkers that are out there saying to you, maybe we should really take some time and pray about this decision before we make it. I doubt, maybe some of you are fortunate, but I doubt that all of you are in a situation where with your coworkers you can really go to the depths and look at what it is that God is setting before you. And so we have to learn it here so that we can be educated and use it out there. The Eucharist isn't just a place where we worship God, although it is, but it is also a school. It's a school where we learn to look at reality and our circumstances in a different way. We're challenged to go out of here and see, is there something, even in the midst of difficulties, is there a way for us to see Christ present? Is there a way for us to look at the desires that well up from within us and see them not as something that we have to fill quickly on our own, but as something that leads us into deeper union with God? Is there a way for us to look at these things that happen and recognize that it is God calling us closer to Him? And in this sense, the question that Jesus sets before Peter is a question that we need to hear as well. Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Do you love me enough to face the difficulties that you will have to face and know that I am with you? Do you love me enough to see my presence in your life? Do you love me enough to wake up every morning and to go in search of me? I mean, Peter dives into the water and swims to the shore to see Jesus. Do we do this in our own lives? Are we diving into the circumstances that we are given, searching for the presence of God, wanting to grow closer to Him? Do you love me more than these? Will you look for me in your life? This is the question that Jesus asks us, not for His sake, but for ours, so that we can grow closer and closer to Him.